Hello everyone and welcome back to Brewmasters, where we interview tabletop game designers and get their insights on the craft. Today we're finishing our conversation with Izzy, a contributor to Amarune's Almanac, author of the Disciple, Incarnate and Occultist classes, Heroes of Dwarfhome and so much more. If you're new to the show and you like what you hear, I'll allow you to have a free action to like, subscribe and hit the bell icon so you get notified when new videos come out. Remember that the show is also now available as a podcast if that fits your media diet better, and you can tune in at brewmasters.buzzsprout.com or click the link in the description. This is part 2 of the conversation, so if you want to go back and catch up with the first half, there's a link in the description. But to summarise, we largely discussed how D&D has changed since 3.5, game mechanic design, player psychology, and took a look at the Warlock and Ranger classes, mostly at surface level. So before we get started, I do know there were some complaints last time about the audio quality in the first Izzy episode. It's an unfortunate situation I'm in, that it's almost random what each guest has in terms of audio hardware. I'm just lucky if they have a mic and a good internet connection. I know that might be annoying for some folks, but where possible, I do try and get the best sound that I can for you, from rescheduling for optimal connection, and even requesting the guests to record the sound on their end and send over like massive files. Unfortunately with Izzy we did get pretty unlucky. His audio quality isn't great. The mic and connection were kind of unreliable throughout the call, and I'll be honest, it actually gets worse in this half of the episode. On top of that, I was coming down with a cold at the time, so throughout this episode I also get more and more bunged up until I had to end the call. So with that in mind, I'm sorry that it's not the best quality. I'll definitely try and keep my standards higher in the future. But I hope that you can enjoy what's left and the content therein. So with that out of the way, let's dive back into the conversation. Good luck.
God, I have a vendetta against melee sorcerers, man.
What provoked that?
I see so many of them, and I want to like them, but God, sorcerers just so bad at it.
Isn't the Warlock the melee caster?
I mean, there's more than one. Warlock's frankly not that good at it either.
Well, it's like the base, archetype, right? Because anything else you'd have to multi-class into it, I think.
Well,
Subclass,
Warlock has martial output in terms, but it's not necessarily melee. Melee would be Blade Pact, but that's where it goes back into being not good at it.
I see.
We might have different definitions of good at the thing. That's something to consider, because I'm very much, I'm very much of a. When it comes to enabling martial play patterns, I'm very specific. Because you can pick Pact of the Blade, and you can be a melee character using Pact of the Blade, but that's generally not enough for me. I'm very much in the camp of, if an option is supposed to enable melee gameplay, it shouldn't be this weird redheaded stepchild kind of situation where you're still not better off, where you're still better off not using the weapon.
That's fair.
Which is where Warlock tends to be.
I think when I say that Warlock is supposed to be a melee class, I think I'm probably talking more from the point of intention of design rather than necessarily execution.
Oh, here, actually, that's an interesting point. I don't think Blade Pact was intended for Warlock to be a melee character.
Really?
I don't. I was looking at how all the Pact boons are organized. You'll notice that all of them open up utility. They're side options. They're never the main option. If you look at Pact of the Tome, it's an option that gives you additional cantrips. You're assuming Eldritch Blast, though, so these cantrips are almost assuredly intended to be utility cantrips.
Exactly.
Yeah. If you look at Familiar, the Pact of the Chain, once again, you're looking at mostly utility. You can attack with the Familiar, but the Familiar's attacks, all of them, are noticeably low damage, high utility. Like, I think two of them knock people out. I think Imp is actually Imp is just generally high damage, but Imp also has at-will invisibility, so it's clearly intended to be a scouting option.
Sure, yeah, it has that like extra utility to
it. So when I look at Blade Pact and I look at the features they gave to support it and how its scaling is like optional, I think they intended it less as, oh look, the Warlock is this, melee Death Knight type of character, and more as the Occultist has his sidearm for when things get too close. So I don't think they intended it to be like, now that you have Blade Pact, you're going to put away your Eldritch Blast and start firing away and start slashing away. I think they literally intended it as, you're going to Eldritch Blast until things get too close. And if things get too close, unlike other Warlocks, you have the option of engaging in melee.
That is actually fair. I mean, to be honest, the Warlock largely confuses me, as I think it does most people, because like it's all over the place, right? Like,
yes.
It doesn't do anything specific. It's very much a builder caster kind of thing.
Warlock is very much limited in the spell casting it can actually do, and its most effective spell is formatted in the same way the martial combat loop is formatted.
Can you go into detail on that?
Yeah, so the martial combat loop is multiple attacks. It increases reliability, decreases the damage of each individual attack to give you a very consistent turn output, and the total value of Warlock's turn output, sans magic items, subclasses, that kind of a thing, is roughly on par with Fighter and Rogue. So it sacrifices some of the durability and some of the augmentations to its at-will output that Fighter and Rogue and other martial classes get in favor of a half, like a botched full casting.
Okay, I see.
So that's why you don't see too many features on Warlock like, hey, when you cast Eldritch Blast, you can, there's no precision strike for Eldritch Blast. There's no Battle Master for Eldritch Blast, that kind of a thing. The augmentations you get for Battle Master tend to be very specific in both in impact and in execution. Things like push the enemy. Which is part of why Hexblade and the new Undead Warlock stirred up a massive storm, because they augmented Warlock's damage potential with Eldritch Blast while not actually making them pay for it in any particular way.
Yeah, because I was speaking to Angry at the weekend, and he was explaining to me that within the realms of combat in 5th edition, you essentially, as a player, only really have two options at a time, right? You've got like the ability to choose where you're going to stand and how you're going to deal damage. Like, very rarely are you going to do anything other than that. Like, it's very much circumstantial. And it feels like, yeah, the Battle Master very much has a lot of control over where it's going to stand. Like, its position matters more in terms of how its maneuvers play into combat, right?
I suppose how you're going to deal damage is the weird thing there, because of course there are more options than just dealing damage within the context of combat.
Sure, I mean, you have like the ability to grapple or to use an item interaction. Healing, yeah. Occasionally using like support spells and stuff like that.
I suppose you can envision support spells as a way of prolonging the amount of damage you are going to deal, because it's kind of what it is. So I don't necessarily disagree with the statement. I think some people are kind of frustrated by that also. They wanted some other sort of dimension there. But that's a different conversation.
Oh yeah, I think that was
Yeah.
largely what we were delving into. Because I mean, I come from 3.5, as I think I mentioned, and
Yeah, so do I.
oh yeah, of course. Yeah, naturally, I had like frustrations with fifth edition, and we were just discussing those kind of frustrations I've had and maybe solutions to it. But yeah, in the context of this conversation about warlocks, I think it's interesting that the warlock doesn't necessarily have much in the way of controlling positioning as opposed to the damage side of things. Because obviously it's a very damage heavy class. Like, it has one of the best cantrips in the game. It's easy to pull that out. And I think everything else feels kind of like bells and whistles.
In a sense, it is bells and whistles. I think part of the issue. I think Warlock suffers the most from its 3.5 legacy. It was a class made in 3.5 that essentially accentuated its normal feat-oriented system by introducing its own class-specific feat system. I think so. I love modularity. But I'm someone who thinks modularity should be used only where it's thematically required, because otherwise it ends up diluting too much. And I think that's actually a very good way to describe Warlock. Diluted.
Yeah, actually, yeah.
So I've made a Warlock rework myself. I don't recall if we got into this in the last. We talked a lot about Ranger. I have a similarly large amount of opinions about Warlock. But it seems like the Warlock discussion is a nice little logical progression here. But with Warlock, it really is. So, like I was saying, diluted is the word I'd use to describe it. You have this really cool subclass. Warlock is extremely popular. The people that love Warlock because. Let's be real. So the story of Warlock is one of the more evocative, and that's how it was the only thing in that 3.5 book that made it out alive past edition bounds.
Yeah, because it's one of the few classes that has its story built into it, right?
Yeah, in a sense, yeah. And the 5e's structure, the pick your subclass, accentuates Warlock extremely well. Of course, the problem with Warlock is, how do you define the power set given to a player by some almost deity? Like, what do you get? Clerics would have this issue if not for the fact that they have years and years and years of stories behind them and historical, Templars and all that jazz to give them more of a solid image.
Yeah.
And I actually think sorcerers suffer from this as well. Warlock being more of like, I made a deal with Asmodeus, and I gave him my firstborn, and in exchange I got X. Define X. How do we define X? What are we doing?
Well, it almost feels like the right way to approach a warlock is not to have a lot of like patron options, but to have a lot of pact options.
Yes and no. Pact options would make more sense in, I think, a story game sort of scenario, as in the genre game of story game. I think Warlock, as obtaining powers related to their patron, is very, very good in the range of characters that it allows the game to portray. So, like, if Warlocks just got pacts that made them good at varying different things, there's now this weird argument that, all right, every class is a Warlock. They just made a pact. That's their backstory. I'm a barbarian because I made a pact with Asmodeus. And that's definitely a viable course. But like now you're taking something away from the concept of Warlock.
Yeah, like it can't just be the anti-cleric, right? Which is kind of where it comes from, I think.
I don't agree with that either. The anti-cleric is a cleric.
Well, yeah, that's probably fair to say. But it has like those similar themes of like worship, of gaining power from something greater than you. Like, I feel like there's synergy between the two.
Right. So the thing is, the warlock is, it is almost, maybe not the anti-cleric, but something like a foil to the cleric.
Okay, yeah, that's a better way of putting it.
So the problem, of course, like I said, is expressing that. You know, when you look at stories of these Pact-born, the warlock type characters, you see the gamut. You know, you see I am like this Death Knight. I see I am a dragon, like Aragon's dragon riders. Like we see, you know, we see I am a warlock. Here is my staff. I am going to summon Demogorgon. I am going to conjure the end of the world. I am going to, you know, I am a warlock. I am going to summon an army of devils and take over the kingdom of, you know, Fantasylandia. You have to find a way to express the full gamut of that. Because remember, like I was saying, mechanics need to be informed by thematics, and the thematics of warlock is, you know, you can look around. I actually think Pact Boons are one of the most intelligent ideas within 5th edition class design. They took the subclass and they gave it a subclass, and then they have this smaller feature that doesn't, but could have, completely redefined and recontextualized that subclass. It's essentially, so this idea is actually what led me to make my Incarnate class, which has 2 subclasses. And this is actually, studying this is how I came about one of my more recent design philosophies. But like, when you have one big choice in your subclass that defines an aspect of your specialization, you have a degree of modularity that feels pretty powerful. You know, I am a battle master. I am a samurai. That feels cool. When you have 2 of those choices, you don't have 2 choices. You know, let's say, let's say anything. Let's look at Warlock.
Sure.
You know, in the player's handbook, I can be a Fiend Warlock, a Great Old One Warlock, or I can be an Archfey Warlock. Now, unfortunately, within Warlock, all of those play kind of the same. You have an additional utility option at level 3, but otherwise you're firing Eldritch Blast. And you have some unique features, you have some unique spells, so you have some individuality, but the bread and butter, that martial underlying setup, is the same behind all the subclasses. The features you get accentuate that.
Yeah, like it's largely a thematic difference.
Exactly, yeah. And I don't necessarily think the base class warlock subclasses do a bad job of portraying the themes of their respective patrons. I think some of them are underpowered, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they don't do a bad job of at least portraying the theme. They could portray them better. Now imagine for a second if, when you had that Pact Boon choice at 3rd level, you had something that actually redefined the context of that pact. So when you have Undying Warlock, or rather, sorry, let's say you have Fiend Warlock. At 3rd level, now when you get, let's say Pact of the Chain allowed you to summon progressively stronger creatures. This is just one potential route. I'm not going to say this is a good route. I'm just saying it's one potential route.
Sure. Hypothetically.
All right. So now you being a Fiend Warlock means that you have this additional definition compared to the Blade Pact Warlock, which, let's just say, that lets you turn into the Nazgul, like a Hell Knight. So now you actually have this thing where Fiend Warlock can't just be expressed by Fiend Warlock with Eldritch Blast and a side thing. You have, I am a Hell Knight warlock. I am a conjurer. I summon the denizens of the abyss by the power of Asmodeus. I am a unlocker of the secrets of the magics of hell, that kind of a thing. You can call yourself those things right now using the mechanics that exist, but they don't deliver on them.
Exactly. And those are really strong images.
Those are very strong images, and the mechanics are not very strong. They're not defining. They help define, without a doubt, but the mechanics themselves don't lend themselves to that sort of declaration. They lend themselves to, I made a deal with Asmodeus and he gave me a sword. He gave me a magic sword. It's a cool sword, but it's a sword.
Yeah, in the grand scheme of things, it's underwhelming, right?
Exactly. I honestly hate blade pact, or not blade pact, like weapon bond style features, because God, to me they're so boring. What think about what Pact of the Blade actually gets you. As an action, summon a sword.
That's like the Soul Knife, right? But not as cool.
Soul Knife does it too. Weapon Bond does it too. I mean, like Eldritch Knight does it too.
Oh, actually, yeah.
That's... I know that's a very popular feature. People like the imagery. I like the imagery. I think it's a boring as hell feature. Like, you're not doing anything. You could just pull the sword out of your back. It's good for hiding the weapon, but how often do you need to hide a weapon?
Yeah, like, it comes up that one time you get arrested and put in jail. Like,
yeah, like, there's a lot more room for a transformative mechanic. So, like, now Fiend, under that paradigm, Fiend Warlock isn't one subclass. Suddenly it's 3. You know, you don't have that limitation of the idea you can express is lifted. And I've been looking at this because I made the Incarnate class. And the Incarnate class, like I said, has 2 subclasses. And I've noticed that the range of character expression I've been able to get out of that class feels higher, at least to me. Of course, I am biased here. Feels to me much greater than the range of expression I could get from the various classes I've seen that have invocation-like subsystems, because the choices you make are fewer, but they're so much more actually impactful to how you play that there's a different window there. There's a different opportunity there.
Yeah, like, it gives you so much more identity.
Yeah, like if you get Eyes of the Rune Keeper on Warlock, that's cool. You can read all writing. That's a really cool feature. But is that going to inform your character in a specific way? I've seen plenty of Warlocks played, and I've seen plenty of people take Eyes of the Rune Keeper because it's a cool ability, and it's eerie, and it lets you do some cool stuff. But does it actually change how you conceptualize your character?
Well, no, it's more of a ribbon, right?
Sure, and so, like, that's the thing. How many invocations change how you conceptualize your character?
Oh, very few.
There are definitely a couple. I think Tomb of Levistus is a great way, is a good one for this kind of a thing.
Yeah, that's pretty much the one I was thinking of.
It's extremely stark. The idea that you encase yourself in ice to protect yourself, that gives a certain image of the kind of character. Like, there's a kind of character that will look at Tomb of Levistus and go like, yeah, and a kind of character that will go to Tomb of Levistus and be like, nah.
Yeah, and it's super thematic of Levistus himself, right? Like, It
is, and you can use things besides Levistus, of course. You can reflavor that.
Oh, sure.
But, like, the mechanic itself speaks to the character in a way. I don't think everything needs to be like this. I think Eyes of the Runekeeper is a perfectly reasonable ability that's a lot of fun and fits Warlock.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like, it's still, like, super stylistic.
Yeah. However, Warlock lacks a lot of features with this kind of definition. I think the most guilty thing is... Oh, actually, no, before I even say this, what is an Eldritch Invocation? Can you tell me what an Eldritch Invocation is?
Choose a class feature?
No, what does it mean for your Warlock, your character?
Oh, I guess they're like little gifts, right? Or
Nope. Not according to the text. That's not what they are.
Oh. Was it like your patron's power sort of changing you or something?
Nope.
You're going to have to tell me.
Eldritch invocations are the result of your own study.
Oh, really?
They are forbidden secrets you have learned that have imparted within you. I think this is like a fragment of magical ability or something like that. It's forbidden knowledge or forgotten knowledge that you've unearthed. So I want to turn your attention to, say, Armor of Shadows. Let's look at Armor of Shadows. You can cast Mage Armor at will. Does that feel secret? Forbidden?
Well, obviously not. It's on like most of the casters' spell list.
Not even most of the caster's spell list. It's an 8-hour spell. At will is essentially irrelevant. You can cast Mage Armor. That's your invocation. That's the dark secret you've unearthed. That is the fragment of forbidden knowledge that imbues you with an abiding magical ability derived from your study of occult lore. That is the wording they use in Eldritch Invocations, the feature.
I'm pretty sure you can buy it from most spell shops.
Yeah, that's kind of... It's like 50 gold for a scroll of Mage Armor.
Mm-hmm.
It might even be 25, I don't remember. That's like... What is this?
Yeah, it's a cop-out, right?
Yeah. So part of the thing is Warlocks used to be entirely at-will abilities. And I think it's cool. It's a cool idea to explore, but it's like, I need to stop saying it's like. Warlock used to be entirely at-will abilities, and that gave it its really cool sort of niche. And it was a neat way to express patrons' power. You know, they've got limitless power. They can give you whatever the hell they want.
Sure. I mean, that's like the whole conceit, right?
In 5th edition, that is expressed in a different way. You know, you don't have control over your powers, so you can only cast them at max level. You don't have this fine level of control. However, you get these, you know, extreme bursts of magic very quickly. That's why they're on short rests, because your patron has imbued you with this power that just surfaces a lot faster than that of other people. That's part of why you made the pact. It's additional power than you otherwise could have gained. Of course, you have to be careful about that when you're making a class. You don't actually want it to be more, but you want it to feel like you're this unleashed thing. And I think the chassis of Warlock is good for that. But again, it always undermines itself in just the worst possible way out of nowhere.
So I'm curious then, what were the changes that you personally made to your custom Warlock? So,
first off, I removed Eldritch Blast, which is controversial to say the least. So, in 3.5, Eldritch Blast was an action. You could do an action to do a spell attack, and on a hit, the spell attack essentially did sneak attack scaling damage. It was 1d6 to 1d10. 1d6 to 10d6. That was Warlock's core thing before. Pact of the Blade, so forgive me if I missed a transition in 4th edition since I didn't play it. But Pact of the Blade in 3.5 was essentially some specific invocations that were like Eldritch Glaive. You can transform your Eldritch Blast into a glaive, and you can just attack with it.
Sounds like 4th edition.
That's what that was. 4th edition did something similar?
Oh, I haven't played it myself. But it sounds like the kind of thing you would get.
No, this is 3rd edition.
Oh, really?
3.5 did this, yes. They had a whole bunch of invocations that changed your Eldritch Blast into a weapon.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what it originally was before turned it into like actual weapon.
Right.
So what I did is I decided, okay, one of the things that upsets me about Warlock is the fact that it's so one note in its playstyle. A martial character will generally have augmentations to their martial abilities that make their martial decision making a little more interesting. Warlock doesn't really have that. In its character building, it makes you choose between the effectiveness of your at-will option and other things. The fact that Agonizing Blast is something you have to pay for is probably one of the most egregious examples of Monty Cook style design in 5th edition. Namely, there is a trap option. You are assumed to have this, but not given it.
Yeah, that's very 3.5.
So my base class has a feature called Eldritch Overflow, which essentially gives scaling dice damage in a sneak attack style fashion, not the same scaling, to cantrips you cast. So now any cantrip can be your Eldritch Blast.
Nice.
And the benefit of this is twofold. Threefold, technically, but... So one of Blade Pact's issues is that the Warlock base class scaled beyond Blade Pact. So, like, when you take Eldritch Blast and Agonizing Blast, you naturally scale beyond what Blade Pact can do, even without taking invocations, additional invocations, while having to take additional invocations for Blade Pact. That's kind of messed up, isn't it? That's part of why it's just not very satisfying to actually to use Blade Pact, and why Hexblade was a thing. So by introducing a system of scaling within the Warlock base class, when you get Pact of the Blade, you can simply add in. All right, now you can use it on these weapon attacks, on your Pact weapon attacks. Now it scales with you. So, from levels 1 to 5, or 3 to 5 in this case, your Blade Pact is now the highest damage Warlock option. You opted into offense. That is what you opted into when you took Blade Pact. It's the offensive Warlock. I also generally made it easier to switch between weapons on Blade Pact. I made it a bonus action. I made it so the ability to inflict this additional damage on any given cantrip, any given Warlock cantrip, is important because now Pact of the Tome is significantly more interesting. The range of viable choices is increased phenomenally.
Because I mean, you're not just choosing the one damage cantrip and then maybe picking at some of the support stuff.
Yeah, so now you can be a Warlock whose primary damaging ability is Thorn Whip. You can be a Warlock whose primary damaging ability is Vicious Mockery.
Yeah, and that's tons more thematic.
Yeah. Like Archfey Tomelock just insulting people to death. And I balanced the scaling around the average damage of the current Eldritch Blast across a D8 cantrip. And then for Pact of the Tome, for Pact of the Chain, I added individual more familiars for each of the individual patrons. Choker for the Great Old One, a Guardian Lion for Celestial, and a Lost Soul for what I ended up turning Hexblade into. So first things, so the Eldritch Overflow, the enhancements to Pact of the Chain, I made it so the familiar shares your initiative. That's important for me.
Yeah, 100% on that.
And that you can actually cast Find Familiar without material components once per short rest. That was also or once per long rest. That also kind of irked me. Not gonna lie.
Yeah. So, I got this great new class feature, but I'm too poor to use it.
Oh yeah, and then Blade Pact also could use Charisma to its attacks, and you can make ranged weapons out of the default.
Yeah, that should really have been standard.
Expanded, for Warlock expanded spells, what I did is I didn't want Warlock to have 25 spells. I felt like that was too much. That's going out of their bounds. I also think expanded spell slots kind of suck to design for and make it harder to allow Warlocks to opt into their more thematic spells easily. So I opted to steal something from my Incarnate. I made it so when you get the expanded spell, you learn one spell automatically from the list from the two. So, Archfey, Fairy Fire, Sleep, you can when you at first level you can choose to learn Fairy Fire or Sleep. And then the other one just gets added to your Warlock spell list if it's not already there. So it's like a hybrid between expanded and extended.
Yeah, that's actually really nice. Without being over the top.
So that, and then the fact that I removed almost every, cast a spell once invocation. I just added those to the Warlock spell list unless they couldn't justify doing it, like with Polymorph and Bestow Curse. For those, and for all the other spell invocations, with very few exception, I made it so I gave them an additional effect that makes them actually feel mysterious or otherwise forbidden, or something that makes them feel more eldritch and abominable. Like for Armor of Shadows, I made it so while under the effects of that mage armor, and you're in dim light or darkness, you get a bonus to your armor class against opportunity attacks, equal to your charisma buff. So while in darkness, you're slippery, you're turning into shadows, you're bypassing people's attacks, and that, to me, is already just infinitely cooler than you can cast mage armor at will, and it's honestly not that much stronger.
Yeah, and it plays into the positional side of combat, which is really practical.
Yeah, like light a torch. For things like Bestow Curse, I made it so you could force a target to make a charisma saving throw instead of a wisdom saving throw, and that while someone is cursed by you, you can actually sense the target's location. Which again, to me already makes that to me makes the Warlock already an infinitely better witch option than they otherwise could do before.
Oh yeah,
because we know that's a very common thing. You see people wanting a witch. The other important things. So really, those are the most important things. I added some additional invocations. I added some additional. I changed up some subclasses. I made it so you can cast other spells using your Mystic Arcanum, so you can actually upcast things, including invocation spells. Like if there's a cast Bestow Curse once per long rest, you can actually use your Mystic Arcanum to cast it again anyway. Because God, that was stupid. Warlocks not being able to cast permanent curses is what? That kind of a thing. Really, the major thing is the changes to the actual pacts, and the changes to the invocations, and the changes to Warlock scaling by removing Eldritch Blast. I also did add a bunch of Eldritch spells.
Yeah, I think that works really well. Because I don't know if it's just because I've been enjoying it in other games, but it almost feels like having so many bad choices in D&D built into it is just kind of a conceit at this point.
I don't think the edition has that many bad choices. I think that the classes that do have them, you can immediately pick out because they're the lowest. They tend to be the lowest ones on the satisfaction rating. Druid, Warlock, Ranger.
I suppose I mean more in the sense of spell options. Because say you want to be a ice themed character, you have maybe a couple of ice spells in there, but the vast majority of spell damage is leaning towards fire, right?
That's more feels less like bad options and more like a lack of specific options.
Well, I mean, you can always argue that you could retheme everything.
You can.
I don't know how impactful it would be to say I'm going to theme my fireball to be an ice version or an acid version.
I'm very much someone who likes reflavoring, but I'm very much someone who thinks there should be a limit to reflavoring.
In what sense?
Maybe not should be. If you're fine with it, you can have your own fun. But for me, I said this before, there are people that say just play Sorcerer and flavor it as a Scion. No, that doesn't work.
Yeah.
No, it may work for you. God bless you if it does. Have fun. It doesn't work for me.
Yeah, because it doesn't fit the tropes, right?
The mechanics don't fit the tropes.
If I'm playing an ice sorcerer, I want to be slowing people, freezing them in place. Reflavoring fireball doesn't really do that.
I think that there is a way to get that across. I'm not sure how well this works, but in my head, I've had features like this in my head for a little bit. All right, first level Ice Sorcerer, you get a feature that says when you learn a spell, you can change all of its damage to ice.
Mm-hmm.
That's the feature.
Oh, okay.
So you don't necessarily have to pick Fireball, but like, let me see if there's something here. This isn't foolproof by any means. Add more ice spells, which is to the coast. But let's say you're a 3rd level sorcerer or 5th level sorcerer getting 3rd level spells. Is there a good option for this actually?
Yeah, and it's like, say you want to be invested in acid. Like the very point of acid in 5th edition seems to be everything is done in D4s. Like, it's not very viable.
I mean, Vitriolic Sphere is like one of the best damaging spells in the game, but also it's like the only good acid spell.
Yeah, and I don't understand why. Like, I mean, they've got so many different damage types, but they don't really make use of them properly. Like, maybe on occasion you'll find something with like a vulnerability or an immunity that you have to work around, but it's super rare.
Let me tell you, dude, Alchemist, this makes me so sad with its acid damage boosts. Like, what are you doing? This is awful. Melf's acid arrow gets outscaled by cantrips, my dude. Why are we doing this?
Yeah, and anyway. I almost feel like I would just prefer if they had like a generic damage spell that you could just flavor to whatever you wanted. I mean, obviously damage types matter in 5th edition to some extent, like enough that they're separated out, but
yeah, I think they leaned towards very impactful moments when it comes to damage types. Like, a monster has vulnerability. That's huge. Huge. And that made them not use it, and that made it just become less.
Yeah.
Ridiculous. It just made it matter less. I think the optimal solution, and this is actually, I think D&D 5e's monster design could be better. So, like, but one example of this would be including more features like the water elemental's cold susceptibility. Things that would otherwise, right? Yeah, more stuff like cold susceptibility. You don't have to make it as absurd as double damage. You can make it so, the fire elemental took, or let's do something else. I can never think of monsters. The iron golem took lightning damage, and now it's moving at half speed. Or, hell, the opposite. The iron golem took lightning damage, now it's moving at double speed.
Supercharged.
That is really cool. There should be more of that.
Well, I mean, I was interested in this idea, and I was kind of playing with something last night around the ideas of like a Pokemon-style element interaction system. So every monster, say, has an element that it's like going to absorb and an element it's immune to. And I was discussing it with Kaim or Nimadim or any of the millions of names he goes by. But he was saying that it ultimately wouldn't be practical because the only time, like, you maybe say you come up against the creature and your players are going to figure that out in one turn and then never use that again on that creature whenever they encounter it.
This is true.
And whenever they find out what the superior element is, if they figure out one or the other, they're going to know the other one instantly because it just makes sense to have the opposites, right? So they're a majority of the time, they're just going to be doing like way more damage output than they should be normally.
Yeah, no, this is correct. Which is why vulnerability as like something like vulnerability was kind of a not fantastic decision. It exacerbated the issue. The problem, that's part of the thing you have to figure out when it comes to the design of damage types. In 5th edition, they are mostly flavor. They exist to enhance descriptions and to keep up thematics of certain creatures. Like, you shouldn't be able to harm the fire dragon with fire.
Yeah, it kind of plays into the trope or conceit, or whatever you want to call it.
One of the ways to make decisions like this more interesting is to just tie in certain mechanical effects to certain damage types. You know, fire necessarily burns. Can't just cast fireball. The fireball will burn things it touches because it deals fire damage.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So they take recurring damage or something like that. That can do it, but then you add a lot of complexity because now you have this lookup table every time you do damage.
And you have to go about applying some kind of an elemental aspect to each creature.
You don't necessarily have to, but something like that, yeah. Yeah. So the idea becomes, instead of baking it into the feature, make features that use those damage types have those effects built in to create the differentiation. So Melf's Acid Arrow and Vitriolic Sphere both cause recurring damage on the subsequent turn, as an example.
That makes sense.
There are limitations to that, though, because it just keeps... If every acid spell does the same thing, then who cares?
Yeah.
Also, here's one. You can take Erupting Earth and convert it to cold damage, and now you have this thing that creates like an ice field.
Oh, like a difficult terrain.
Yeah. The opposite issue there is that Erupting Earth isn't good, but that's a different point.
Well, when I was talking about this with Kaim, I think the point I was trying to make is that when I was talking to Angry, we were saying like, okay, well, you've got two parts to combat. There's where you stand and how you deal damage. And where you stand, it can be really easily like innovated on. Like you can have positional tactics from the DM, like a lot of class features and stuff play into that. You can have really interesting environments that make you change where you're standing. I mean, you don't necessarily have to bring in like the increased attacks of opportunity from 3.5. But that was kind of the point of them back then, or like flanking and stuff like that.
Well, in 3.5, if you moved an attack, you only got a single attack. You had to stand still to get all your attacks.
Yeah, you couldn't split move and fire.
You can get feats to let you do it, but you couldn't do it by default.
Yeah, you just had like the 5-foot step, right?
You had one 5-foot step you could do on a turn. Yeah.
But the other big part of 5th edition combat is how am I going to do damage? And there's almost no innovation there. And trying to innovate on it brings you kind of back into 3.5 where it's interesting. Like the idea that if you hit a skeleton with the wrong kind of melee weapon, it's not going to be as effective. But the moment your players figure that out, that's a one-time thing. And they know that forever. And they're never going to make the same mistake, really. And it falls into the same problem with all the damage types.
So this is actually where it goes into that 5th edition monster design thing I was saying, where it could be better. 5th edition monsters don't really have tactics.
No. Like, they're all very much the same thing with, like, different themes, right?
Yes.
It's just the same, like, dice roll of damage dressed up as a slice or a hammer or a breath weapon or something.
How many creatures in the monster manual can be represented by the orc stat block?
That's a good way of putting it, yeah. Like, too many.
There's so many variation on man with sword that it's kind of insane. Like, the differentiation of a hobgoblin and an orc is that the hobgoblin deals, 2 times weapon damage, or 2 times the die on their attacks for some reason.
Something lore related, I imagine.
Oh, it's just called martial advantage. Like, what does that mean? They're supposed to be tactical masterminds. Why isn't there anything here that helps me do that? The ogre is supposed to be this big, crushing, smashing, wild thing. So it has this big attack. But, like, nothing about the ogre feels big except its damage die. How would you are this, this master monster tactician. You are a hobgoblin warlord. What do you do? Where do you place your ogre versus where do you place your hill giant? There's no tactical difference there. Well, I suppose that, let's assume the Hill Giant doesn't have a rock throw ability.
Well, I mean, this kind of falls again into something I was talking about with Angry, where it's like, well, not Angry, Kime. Like, you can be, like, I think Matthew Colville did a whole video on positional tactics with monsters. Like, you can put the ranged monsters at the back, you can have like a big burly monster to chase them around, you can have melee monsters to make sure they have difficulty moving without provoking attacks of opportunity, and like don't group them together so they can't fireball you and all this. And it feels like that's about as innovative as you can really get with monsters. And even that much feels very soft to me.
Yes and no. Like, have you seen Matt Colville's video on villainous actions?
Oh, is that like the action-orientated monsters?
These are monsters that essentially have a ramp, a progression each turn. So think of them like legendary actions. They can do them on someone else's turn, once per round, I think it was. But on the first turn, they do their first one. On the second turn, they do their second one, and on the third turn, they do their third one. That sense of progression within the combat is different. The example used is, I believe it was a hobgoblin. He had a bunch of goblins, tactically positioned. Okay, the first turn, he commands one goblin to attack. I don't remember the specific example, but this is something. The second turn, you see him raise his hand up, and he prepares like all the goblins to attack. On his third turn, they all fire. That's tension. That is interesting. That gives you some stake. And that gives you something to respond to. Yeah,
it's like you're injecting narrative into the fight.
Exactly. That gives you something to respond to. As a player right now, it's difficult to respond to a thing until after it's already done. I feel like you see a lot of players that are homebrewing doing a lot of like reaction-based stuff because they want to feel like their character is like in there doing things.
Yeah, you're never required to be proactive. You're always reactive, right?
Well, not necessarily. The problem is, well, not the problem, but you are always reactive in a sense, but you're reactive to the thing they've already done. You can't react to the things they're doing unless you have this feature that says you can react to the thing they're doing.
Yes. So this is another thing that me and Angry was talking about, like the idea of having some kind of a mechanical way of monsters telegraphing what they're about to do for like really big attacks. Like he suggested if you have the dragon, like at the end of its turn, inhaling as if it's about to breathe out a massive breath weapon. Like, so the players then have to react to it. And that disrupts the flow of combat so that it makes things interesting. Like, the players have to actually engage with the fight.
Exactly. Like, so things along those natures, things that give the players the feeling of reacting to the flow of the battle rather than specific, reacting to an attack. That's not usually very... It can be tactical, but it's not strategic. And so I'm not really like a tactics nerd, a strategy nerd, anything like that. But it definitively helps players be engaged in a given scenario when it feels like what they do is going to have influence on the thing that's happening next. And generally speaking, just like dealing damage and killing things does this to an extent, but it's a very rudimentary surface level thing. You can do this sort of increased engagement without necessarily making the game more mechanically complex on a rules level.
Because, I mean, I don't disparage my players for not really caring what any other player is doing on their turn when they're all doing the exact same thing. Where am I going to stand? Next to this guy. What am I going to do? I'm going to attack him. And they all do the same thing, and they're just waiting for their turn to do that thing. Like, it's not interesting to any of them what anyone else is doing because it's not required to be.
Exactly. Now that makes a 5th edition easier to get into, but a lot harder, a lot easier to... Well, the more experienced you are, the more frustrated you can get with these small elements.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say.
To be fair, that's true of literally every system. The more you get used to it, the more you want a different thing.
I mean, it's like playing on a simplified mode, right?
Yeah. So this is what I mean when I say, like, 3.5 accomplished a lot of what it accomplished through or complicated system-wide rules. But you don't need to do that. You can add flavor to a given monster by enabling different strategies for the monster. Like in 3.5, you actually see that a lot of monster entries were like, here's what this guy does on the first 3 turns. So even if 2 monsters had extremely similar stat blocks, like, red dragon, green dragon, the things they do on their first turns are distinct, extremely distinct. Red dragon or green dragon might, go invisible, stinking cloud, breath weapon. Red dragon might just, charge the wizard. It made engaging with those creatures, even if they were similar, extremely different. And 5th edition doesn't have guidelines for that. You can still do that, but the lack of guidelines is very harmful for new players and for frankly people that want to drop into a game. If you're a DM and you're like, I want to use this monster, it takes a lot of effort to make that monster interesting right now.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of environmental design. It takes a lot of this kind of stuff.
Yeah, there's always extra length you have to go to. Like, I think there was a really good example of this where one of my friends wanted to DM his first game, and he wanted to do it at level 11 because there was a very specific monster he'd seen in the monster manual that he really liked the look of and wanted to put up against. But he put it up as a solo monster, and naturally we just crushed it, regardless of how powerful it was. I mean, it maybe got to do like 1 or 2 things before having to like use a spell to escape. And he just didn't grasp that, okay, when you've played from level 0 up to this point, you would understand that you actually have a pool of experience points that you spend towards smaller monsters that kind of back up the larger central monster of the fight. And then you have to worry about positioning, the environment, like what kind of abilities the players have and how you're going to engage with that.
There's that, and there's also the simple fact that, well, 5th edition doesn't necessarily do single monster encounters very well.
Oh, no.
And this would also be a way to address that. A system like this that gave a monster a specific overarching strategy. You could even make a general one and then specific one for monsters. Like, okay, monstrous actions. At the end of someone's turn on a round, they do these things in sequence. All right, so this is a generic defensive one. All right, end of your turn, monster takes a dodge action, first round. Okay, end of your turn, the monster uses its fastest speed to move as far away from you as possible. Like, give a progression to the monster's. Give a progression to the monster's actions. That progression will innately color the fight. Because they know that the longer the fight goes on, the more this thing is going to be able to do.
Yeah. Because you want it to play like, kind of like a video game, right? Like, when you're fighting a video game boss, they kind of start out doing one thing, then they go into phase 2 and it's like a little bit more powerful, and then phase 3 is like the desperation phase where it's like really fast and like ruthless, trying to fight for its life. Like, it has a narrative progression to what's happening mechanically.
Yes and no, right? They added that with Mythic Monsters. And Mythic Monsters are good. I like Mythic Monsters.
Was that a Unearthed Arcana or something?
That was in the Theros? The Greek book.
Oh, okay. I haven't read that one.
Yeah, so Mystic Monsters are essentially legendary monsters that after you reduce them to 0 hit points, regain their hit points, and they'll go into a second phase.
Okay. They
are like super tough and all that jazz. And they have that sense of progression, but it is exactly one escalation. And that escalation can last a couple of turns as you're figuring out what its new abilities are. Because it gets mythic actions, like some new legendary actions, essentially. But what I'm talking about has, I would say, a much more palpable escalation, one that you would the individual player would care about more because it's happening every single round. It never leaves your mind.
Yeah, because those mythic monsters sound a lot like something I read on Angry's journal, where he basically had the idea that
Yeah, Paragon monsters, yes.
yeah, like you kill the monster and it basically becomes another monster, like in terms of how it functions, right?
It's similar. It's extremely similar. Yes, it's a two-phase boss fight.
Hmm.
But I'm less so talking about phases, and I'm more so talking about phases, and more so talking about a natural escalation.
Oh yeah, I totally appreciate that.
So I brought up the green dragon from 3.5 in the SRD here.
Hmm.
So green dragons initiate fights with little or no provocation, picking on creatures of any size. If the target is intriguing or seems formidable, the dragon stalks to the creature to determine the best time to strike and the most appropriate tactics to use. If the target appears weak, the dragon makes its presence known quickly. It enjoys evoking terror. Sometimes the dragon elects to control a humanoid creature through intimidation and suggestion. Green dragons, that's the spell. Green dragons especially like to question adventurers to learn more about their society and abilities, what's going on in the countryside, and if there's treasure nearby. That one set of sentences, to me, has told me significantly more about how to play a green dragon than the entire green dragon entry in the 5th edition Monster Manual.
Yeah, 100%. I don't think I've read that before, and it sounds like really insightful.
So let me see here.
It actually reminds me of in 4th edition, because I did have a read of it recently, but a big part of their monster stat blocks is they actually include something akin to that with like specific tactics stating how it should behave in combat. Like on turn 1, use this feature, on turn 2, use this feature. Like,
yeah, no, like definitively. That makes monsters more interesting. Like, you don't have to make the game any more systemically complicated to make these monsters more interesting. And of course, not every monster has to be this way.
Oh, for sure.
I'm just saying, like, more than what we have now, please. I would say that anything that, it's very rare that you deploy a single orc against a party.
100%, yeah.
At low levels, an ogre showing up is the oh shit run. That ogre should have something like this. Some escalation. First turn, it smacks down. Second turn, big sweeping arc with its great club. Third turn, it just jumps on you. Like, give me a sense of something there. When the ogre's turn comes around, swing. Like, that's not...
Yeah, you want to be surprised, right?
It can be tense. It can be tense because an ogre does a lot of damage. If you swing at the wizard, that is already very tense. And that's what we have to keep that in mind. We have to contextualize these things.
Yeah, you still have to deploy it carefully. Yeah.
But if there's this sense of escalation, the entire fight changes its tune. And I like the idea of having generic tactics because it allows you to take the common thing that the monsters do and switch them out. So, like, there's the ogre tactics, and then there is the defending lair tactic. All right, so this ogre is defending its lair. So I'm going to swap out the ogre tactics with defending lair tactics and just use those.
I see, yeah. Like having a set of actions that you can swap in and out.
Right. And now this goes even a bit farther. Now that each creature can have these modular attacks, these modular actions, not even attacks, the player can no longer predict what an ogre does. Because now there is more to the ogre than just ogre. Now there are external factors that enhance the abilities of that ogre.
And potentially even like the players could eventually coin onto this kind of thing, and that can empower the class abilities that aren't just combat based, like being able to have the ranger identify if this thing is near its lair, or being able to track it so that it's in a position where it's in a hunting mode, say, and then taking advantage of that particular attack form.
Potentially, yeah. That seems a bit harder to actually execute on. Well, actually, no, here's what you could do. You could do like a ranger's intuition thing where you're like, if we attack this thing, what's its first tactic going to be? That gets a lot more concrete. Let me see here. So, the most cunning and treacherous of the true dragons, green dragons use misdirection and trickery to get the upper hand against their enemies. Nasty, tempered, and thoroughly evil, they take special pleasure in subverting and corrupting the good-hearted. In the ancient forests they roam, green dragons demonstrate an aggression that is often less about territory than it is about gaining power and wealth with as little effort as possible. Green dragon is recognized, don't care about how they look. Wormling, don't care about how they look. Don't care about how they look. Green dragon hunts by patrolling its forest. It eats any creature it can see and consumes shrubs and small trees when hungry enough, but its favorite prey is elves. They're consummate liars and masters of double talk. They favor intimidation of lesser creatures and employ more subtle manipulations when dealing with other dragons. Green dragon attacks animals and monsters with no provocation, especially when dealing with potential threats to its territory. When dealing with sentient creatures, a green dragon demonstrates a lust for power that rivals its draconic desire for treasure. It is always on the lookout. Why does this take me so long to read? Give me a small blurb. Again, everything this has said so far has been succinctly demonstrated, not even told me, demonstrated by the 3 or so sentences in the 3.5 entry. Not like, here's what they are. No, this is what they do.
Exactly.
Here's another great one. Red Dragon. Because red dragons are so confident, they seldom pause to appraise their adversary. Upon spotting a target, they make a snap decision whether to attack using one of many strategies it worked out ahead of time. A red dragon lands to attack small, weak creature with its claws and bite, rather than obliterating them with its breath weapon, so as to not destroy any treasure they might be carrying. Once again, like this one's worse than the green dragon one. They could outline some potential strategies.
Yeah.
But like, even then, the idea that a red dragon would refuse to use its breath weapon is just alien to the description of a 5th edition red dragon. even if it's in the monster manual, I have never seen that acted on.
No.
Whereas this is actively telling you.
Sure,
this is what they tend to do.
It's basically the front cover of the older monster manuals, right? Like a red dragon using its breath weapon.
Yeah.
It's the iconic D&D image.
So, like, if 5th edition monsters had that, and this goes back to my love of modularity, but my hate of modularity, right? If they had this simple modular system, as opposed to, like, completely modular monster designs, that'd be nuts. The range of possible actions, the range of possible types of encounters goes up. And I would argue that it goes up more than if you actually just had entirely modular monsters.
Well, I mean, in 4th edition, the way that everything worked was scaling, right? So you had like your level 1 kobold, your level 5, your level 10 encounter versions, and you probably had like 4 or 5 different versions of each creature with different stat blocks to fight them at different levels. Obviously, in 5th edition, they went for... there is a word for the design...
It's not bounded accuracy, no?
That's the word, yeah. Bounded accuracy.
Yeah.
So what would be interesting then is if maybe they brought back in the idea of like, not necessarily having different level versions of monsters, but like you have every monster stat block and then maybe a signature action or 2, and then you slot in one of like 10 different behavioral action sets.
Yeah, no, I mean, you optionally slot in some behavioral action sets.
Yes.
If a new DM doesn't want to use them, they don't have to. Complexity is up to you, just like feats. Yeah,
exactly. Because like, I think some of the most iconic fights I ever had in 3.5 were like, one of them was the Entomber. This like fantastic undead creature. Every time it does a melee attack, I think it either does or you have to save against it, but it can bury you under the ground and you start suffocating.
I've used one of those.
Yeah, like you have this fantastic hot potato of like your players desperately like, okay, do I have to try and like dig out my friend so they can breathe? Do I dig them out thoroughly so they can actually climb out and get back in the fight? Or do I attack the creature? Like, and I think Angry made a point of this, that the interesting part about creatures like that is they make you make choices, not decisions. Because like A decision would just be the mathematical, okay, what's the most optimal thing I do this turn? It's math. It's boring. It's predictable. Anyone can make that same decision. But when you're making a choice, you're choosing, what kind of character am I? Am I going to let my friend suffocate to try and get hit on this thing? Am I going to sacrifice my friend so that I can actually try and survive? Like, am I going to forego fighting the monster so I can try and save someone?
And that's actually the rare example of a monster that probably doesn't need a tactic set.
Like, it's built in, right?
It's built in. You could still give it one, but you'd have to be careful at that point to not overwhelm.
Yeah. And I think that was, I think Angry described that because he does video game analysis, and he described something called first order optimal strategies, which is like a video game design thing where, like,
the first effective thing that works is the thing your player is going to continue to repeat to do.
And potentially in the context of RPGs is the best thing. Like, it works really well for RPGs, but it's terrible game design for video games because you don't want a player to only do one thing. You don't want them interacting with one feature. But in RPG design, making the most obvious first thing that you can do against a creature the optimal thing is great because then you're playing into it, right?
Yes and no. In terms of clarity, yes. You want... So here's the thing. The scenarios where you want that to happen, I think, are kind of the same as in video games in a sense. You want the most obvious thing to be the correct thing in the instance where that assists in the story, I suppose. You know, shooting the Cyclops in the eye is exactly what you want your players to do, because that's the cool trope, right? I'm gonna slay this Goliath by shooting it in the eye.
Sure.
Not Goliath, but Cyclops.
Yeah.
But like, if the thing is too obvious, you run into the other situation where the simplest, most effective thing just becomes standing and hitting. Yeah.
And I think I actually misquoted him, and I don't want to do that. I just want to clarify that he specified that first order optimal strategies is good for beginner DMs because it makes for easy encounter design.
Yes.
That works out of the box.
Yes, 100%. That I agree with. So this is where one of my other design principles comes in. The idea of optional complexity becomes very, very it becomes much more apparent. So the tactics I'm talking about would be optional complexity. You don't have to opt into them. New DMs don't have to opt into them. But you can. And if you do, you get something out of it. Just like with feats.
Yeah.
You don't have to opt into them. But you can. And when you do, you get more complexity, but you get a little bit higher of a range of expression.
Yeah, it adds a little bit more difficulty.
Difficulty is not the word I want to use, because difficulty is not the goal. The goal here is engagement. The goal is engagement.
Okay, yeah.
God, I remember the encounter. Definitely almost killed a party member with that.
Yeah, they should have brought it back. I think another really interesting monster was the Sylphala. It was like this splat book creature from one of the Aberration splat book, Lords of Madness. And like, the lore behind it was really weird, and it doesn't really matter. But basically, a bunch of wizards turned themselves into insects, formed a swarm, and then that swarm of an entire race of elven wizards became a singular creature. And the way that it worked in combat was that while it was in its full solid form, it would get a ton of like melee attacks. But if you hit it hard enough with a physical attack, you could break it back into a swarm. And while it was in a swarm, I think its spellcasting came online, but obviously then it's weak to the AoEs that you can throw against it. So the tactics was to break it into a swarm, AoE it, and then every time it reformed, try and break it back down again with melee. So you have this interesting back and forth between the two, between melee and magic taking priority. There's a little bit like a raid boss in that way.
The one thing I can think about there is that if there's the chance of low rolls just making it so it does not transform.
Potentially, yeah. And obviously, like, the polymorph can be really, really bad if it starts like stacking up and you let it get out of control, like the whole
It
team.
was worse back then.
Oh yeah, yeah. Like that was pretty much a guaranteed kill because if you got killed while polymorphed.
Yeah, so for people who don't know, in previous edition, polymorphing someone would change their stats to the stats of the monster. But there was no overflow damage. If you were reduced to 0 hit points while a different creature, you just died.
And you didn't have death saves. You had negative 10 hit points before you died.
Yep. Negative 10 hit points, you died. Which essentially means if you hit 0 hit points, it's very likely that you die.
Yeah, and you were actually bleeding out as well. Like you had to roll to stabilize, which just meant you weren't losing hit points each round. The good old days.
Essentially, if you got hit with a single attack while downed, you died.
Yeah, it was much more brutal than these days. But then you could say that for every edition.
And also, I think a long rest healed you for like twice your level in hit points.
That sounds right, because you didn't have hit dice.
Nope. And you also definitely didn't regain all your hit points over a single day. Which that would be a hella interesting thing to try in 5th edition.
Well, I am interested in trying out extended rests where like a short rest is an 8-hour sleep and a long rest you have to take an entire week and utilize downtime.
Yeah, I've looked into that, and I've tried it for a bit, and it was kind of not that fun for me. The thing about extended resting is it's very good for a different paced campaign. And of course this is true for anything that changes the rest system, right? But like it very much forces you to take time more seriously. Because the things you could do a lot more in a week than you can right now. So the primary use of that system is making time sensitive situations more reasonable. And also it very much buffs short rest classes a lot.
Yeah, because 5th edition isn't really built around the attrition model that older versions are. Like, I don't think many people even care about resources anymore.
I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. There's definitely people that care a lot about things like spell slots and whatnot. It's like physical item resources, people I feel like they care a lot less about.
That's what I meant to say, sorry.
I feel like that's more of a system. I feel like it's more of a problem of a inventory system that has not evolved to meet the expectations of the new generation of tabletop RPGs. They've innovated a lot of the design, but none of the actual inventory. Because if you look at Pathfinder 2e, Starfinder, their inventory systems are way better. Like, concretely better.
In what way?
It's less cumbersome. Do you want to track the individual weight of every item? I don't. So, theirs is not even the best I've seen, but like, okay, you have essentially 3 measurements of weight. You have negligible, you have a light bulk, and a bulk. And if you have 10 light bulks, you have 1 bulk. Negligible bulks are negligible unless you have such a high amount of them that they become 1 light bulk, DM's discretion.
Oh, so they kind of stack on each other the same way that like copper goes into silver, silver goes into gold.
Yeah. This item is 3 bulks. Sick. I can do 20 bulks. That is so much better than 15 times your strength score in pounds. Like, the best I've seen is honestly, it was a system that made, I think it was by Kale Reader. It's essentially an inventory system with inventory slots. You get an item, you slot it into that inventory. The amount of slots you have depends, I believe, on the type of the type of bag you have, and your stats. Not just strength, multiple stats. like how well can you pack also matters to just how many. It's just how strong you are. Things like that. And the entire system is very evident because once you've filled in all the slots, you don't have inventory space. And once you haven't, and if you haven't, you still have inventory space. It's very similar to like a tabletop RPG version of that video game inventory system where you have to like puzzle piece things into place.
Yeah, like the Diablo and System Shock 2 style.
Yes, but without any of like the things that you'd only expect to be doing on a video game, like the turning and whatnot. It's just like this is 3 slots.
Yeah, that actually sounds alright. I mean, would you have to print out like a different sheet for each kind of?
You'd print out a different sheet for each, or for each like pouch you have. For each type of pouch, I suppose.
Because I think another system I've seen that looks quite efficient is the abstraction of a resource die. I think Matthew Colville's mentioned.
Matthew has mentioned that. I have looked into that as well. I've been trying to do it for traveling, so like not having to bother with rations, that thing like that. But the problem I've run into is a logistical one. We're like, all right, we're going to do a 2 weeks trip. We're going to start going out. One of the players can just go, okay, I'm going to buy 50 rations. What do I do?
Can't you just assume that you have like enough rations?
Sure, but what's that do to the supply die?
Well, I suppose if it's a significant enough expenditure, doesn't it go down in size?
It does, but at what point do you say this die physically can't really affect how much resources you have?
Like it's too abusable because of the extraction.
It's not even abusable. I'm saying like it can't accurately represent the level of over-preparedness you can do. If a player has a bag of holding and 200 rations in it, and they're going to go on a week trip, what are you doing? Like, there's not really much recourse.
True.
What I've been using it personally for is so I've been doing like Heroes from Dwarfhome book, all about Forgotten Realms, dwarves, and stuff. And I used it in the crafting system. Rather, I didn't use it necessarily. So the psionic talent die. I essentially used that. Did I already talk about? No, I didn't already talk about it.
I think we have.
Did we?
Yeah, because I remember you mentioning this before. Your improved crafting system.
Yeah, the basic gist. Whether or not you can craft something is dependent on your passive score. And the complexity of the project gives you a die ranging from D12 to D4. You pay the cost for the item crafting up front, and then every time after you finish an 8-hour period of work, you roll the die. That complexity die. If it's a 1, you have to make a check, or you lose progress. The die size goes up. If it's the maximum number on the die, you make progress. Die size goes down. If you roll 4 on a D4, you succeed, and you succeeded crafting the item.
Yeah, that sounds much more practical.
And it's significantly less annoying, in my opinion, than tracking an individual gold cost or just being like, and it's more interactive than just being like, this is going to take 50 weeks. Good luck.
Yeah, because when I did my True Namer homebrew, I wanted a system that allowed you to kind of use an equivalent of crafting to figure out the true name of something. And I pretty much did a copy of the existing crafting system where it's going to take X amount of like skill rolls, and that's going to take X amount of time for you to be able to make your next roll. And yeah, it was just ridiculously over cumbersome.
Yeah, and the idea that downtime is in these discrete chunks where you just build it doesn't tend to happen as much as you'd want to.
No, I mean, downtime almost never happens.
Yeah, 5th edition isn't based around module play. You don't do a little adventure and then a little adventure and then a little adventure. They haven't released content like that. And that's where downtime works. So this 8 hours of work kind of scenario with a die allows you to better actually like it gives you the potential to actually do things over the course of a day out in the field, you know, as opposed to work weeks.
No, exactly. It's like it fits the dynamics of how the pacing of the game better.
Yeah, it's still not like it's still better in downtime, 100%. It's just like, you know, if you're on like a cart in a road trip, you can whittle something down in the meantime. Things like smithing is still kind of hard to do on the go, but I made a magic item that's a portable smithy, so I'm good.
Yeah. Just had a mental image of like a wagon outfitted as like a kind of mobile blacksmith.
You should see the dwarven spelljammers, dude.
Oh, really?
Yeah, dwarven spelljamming ships are actually powered by the divine influence of crafting.
That's awesome.
So its engine is a bunch of dwarves making shit. As long as the dwarves keep making shit, the engine keeps running.
That's awesome.
It's really cool. All of the spelljammers have these insane methods of powering themselves. It's awesome. Give us 5th edition spelljammer wizards. You've been hinting at it for like years. Please, God.
I think I've mentioned a couple of times now that it's interesting that so many people are harking for a new spelljammer, but I don't think it was ever actually that popular at the time.
I honestly couldn't tell you. That I just do not know.
I mean, it seems like super mysterious and interesting, and certainly there have been some really interesting like tales handed down, but I don't think in its actual era in 2nd edition that it was necessarily that popular or like well received even.
The people who liked it really, really liked it.
And they've definitely been the ones who have like seeded this interest in our generation of players.
Then there's Dark Sun, which is just never going to happen because they can't decide on how to do psionics.
Yeah. I don't know, do you think you'll get Dragonlance before Dark Sun?
I don't know if they're going to do Dragonlance, I'll be real with you.
Well, at least they're not doing Oriental Adventures.
Well, technically that's Forgotten Realms.
Oh, is that an extension of the...
I think the way it was started as its own setting, but became the Eastern Faerun.
Because I remember it had something to do with, like, it was D&D... I don't know if they were intentionally ripping it off or if they were partnered with them, but the Legend of the Five Rings stuff.
I know of it, but I don't know much about it.
Yeah, because I know they have their own role-playing game, but I think I remember that, like, Oriental Adventures was based around, like, Legend of the Five Rings maybe to start with, and then it branched off into its own thing.
Right, Karator. Karator was the name of, essentially, the Asia of the Forgotten Realms. Yeah, Karator is a fantasy world created by Gary Gygax, David Zeb Cook, and Francois Marcella Freudeval, and detailed in 1985's Oriental Adventures in the 1st edition role-playing game. Karator roughly corresponds to East Asia in the real world. Originally intended as the western part of the continent of Oeric in Oerth, in Dragonlance, I believe, is Oerth. It's Greyhawk. It was first released in a standalone campaign setting, but when they combined with TSR, it was placed onto the planet Toril, lying east of Faerun. I believe it's called the Unapproachable East.
So that was like Gygax's Asia.
Yes, was transplanted into Forgotten Realms.
Yeah, because here I see it. So Rokugan is the Japan-like setting of Legend of the Five Rings that was briefly an official Dungeons & Dragons campaign setting via 3rd edition Oriental Adventures. And then it was a third-party setting for a bit longer via Rokugan D20 after Wizards of the Coast lost the rights to the setting. And I think that must have been when Legend of the Five Rings became its own game.
No one ever talks about Aussie, man.
Which one was that?
That is Forgotten Realms Australia.
I'm guessing it must have just been terrifying.
There's not that much about it, actually. It was... I think there was like some brief mentions of it in God, I don't even know. So here's the way I know about it, right? I know about it because I love Incarnum, and the totemists of Incarnate, of the Incarnum books, were said to be some in the continent. The people of this land were known as Auslanders.
Very subtle.
But they were essentially their whole shtick is that they were based on Aborigines, essentially.
Okay.
God, I love totemists, but God, it's so hard to port them to 5th edition. I'm going to harp on this. I've had 20 different attempts, 20 different base classes or class versions of totemist that I've been trying to make work. And God, I can't get any of them to work to the degree that I want.
What's the trouble you're having with it?
Well, Incarnum is complicated. That's the number one thing. Incarnum, it had so here's the basics of Incarnum. You are a meld shaper. Meld shapers can essentially reach into the fabric of the universe and tap into the spiritual energy, the soul, the essence, the collective essence that radiates the background of the universe, where all things come from and go to.
Sort of like a proto-matter.
Yeah. So it's the proto-matter of soul. You, as a meld shaper, essentially take that and give it physical form in the form of items called soul melds. And those items stick to your body. They are a part of you.
Like an extension of your soul?
Essentially, by you meld your soul to this background soul energy. You call upon a certain experience, and that experience grants you a specific sort of item to work with. You can have a bunch of different soul melds on at once. You essentially became this arsenal. Every soul melding class, every meld shaping class, had access to all of the soul melds for that class, and you could prepare them like a prepared caster did.
Okay.
These guys would give you passive, or they would give you abilities that you could use essentially as many times as you want. Some of them had some specific ways to limit them, but generally speaking, they are passive or at-will abilities. But it's still it's incredibly philosophical and esoteric.
Sounds like your Moby Dick.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. This has spawned. So this was originally my take on the Incarnate, which is the other meld shaping class. They essentially became the incarnation of an extreme corner of the alignment chart. Obviously, when I was making that in 5th edition, I was like, this is not a great idea because alignment's been de-emphasized and all that jazz. All right, so clearly, if I'm trying to represent chaotic evil, I do a demon. If I'm trying to represent lawful good, I do an angel. So going to that creature type, it makes sense. Okay. And then I realized as I was making the soul melds that it just kind of fell apart at this point because all the soul melds had become invocations for a specific kind of incarnate. Like, the wings invocation, all right, if you're a specific kind of demon, you take that. If you're a specific kind of angel, you take that. And it became kind of slowly clear to me that I was falling into the same pitfall as Warlock, and that everything was becoming sort of a muddled mess. And that's when the idea for dual subclasses came in as I studied Warlock. And that's how I got the current modular 2 subclass Incarnate with no invocations. Because now I instead of having these weird half invocations that could potentially scale with one thing or another, I have these dedicated subclasses that deliver very well in a specific concept that any of the other, angel, demon, so on subclasses can take. And now I have this modular class that does everything I needed it to. Yeah. And it evolved beyond Incarnum. The totemists, I still want to be Incarnum, and that's my problem. And also because, you see every so often these sorts of shapeshifter type classes that just use invocations, and it's kind of boring because you have this list of hodgepodge. There's no rhyme or reason to the invocations that you take. They're just a mess of all the ideas you can think of that a shapeshifter might use. There's no thematic coherency to the features beyond that you change your shape.
Yeah. It's almost akin to like the Eidolon classes from Pathfinder that people try and put in 3.5. It's like, okay, you've got a pet, and as your pet levels up with you, it gains new abilities. So you kind of build your own monster that is your pet. But obviously, monsters are such a wide range of things that you either don't have enough options or you have too many, and it's unfocused, and you get the analysis paralysis.
Yeah, no, pretty much the same sort of issue there, yeah. Which is why the most successful classes that do pet stuff tend to have subclasses that constrain the concept. Like Soulbinder, I'm not personally like a massive fan of Soulbinder, but I think it's a pretty decent class. It's one of those things where I'm not a massive fan of it because, quote unquote, I would do it different. But I don't have any issue with it balance wise. It's perfectly fine.
Yeah, I like that class.
Subclasses immediately constrain what you can do. Immediately. You pick demon. You have demon.
Like each of the subclasses is basically the subtype for the creature, right?
Right. There's an argument to be made that even that is the wrong way to do it. There's an argument to be made where the most effective thing would be to make your subclass how you interact with your monster, and then find a way to let the base class figure out the characteristics of the monster. That's, I think, something I've heard Kime talk about. But I don't know if I necessarily agree to that. I'm saying it's a different potential approach.
Well, Kime is very less is more kind of a homebrewer, I feel.
Yeah, no, definitely. He brags about how short his classes are.
And yeah, that's Frag Source's Soulbinder, right?
Yes, Frag Sauce's Soulbinder. If you're all looking for a pet class, look that guy up. It's definitely not bad. At least last time I checked it out, it's been a bit.
I think there's like 11 different soul bonds you can get with it now. Like he's done lots of little expansions to it.
God, I need to redo Disciple.
I love Disciple, man.
It's still like easily one of my favorite classes, but I'm gonna streamline it a bunch. Because right now it's let's not get into that. Go back a bit. So like a lot of these shapeshifter style classes have these thematically sort of stunted invocation systems, just on account of how these thematically stunted invocation systems, because the invocation system doesn't have an explicit purpose within the class design. It's the area you put the things you couldn't put anywhere else. Yeah,
like it's ideas, but it's not like a specific kind of idea.
Yeah, and a lot of the times you see classes that like you read and you're like, this feels kind of bland, but I can't quite figure out why. It's that. And I personally get that a bit reading Warlock, because Eldritch Invocations kind of feels like that.
Yeah. No, it makes total sense.
And it's also why when people come to me with a class that has an invocation system, 9 times out of 10, I'll be like, remove this. Your class will be better if it's not there. I stand by that. 99% of the time, your class is better without an invocation system. A dual subclass system, I am convinced, does more work with less complexity. Technically, the range of characters you can express with an invocation system is higher, but practically I find it is lower. Because each feature can't afford to exist on its own as a defining, powerful thing, because if it could, then it would have to contend with all the other unique, defining, powerful things that you would have access to, and you'd ultimately have this character that has a whole bunch of unique, powerful things that eventually becomes overtuned and overshadows other people.
Yeah. It's like you can't have the main feature of every class.
Exactly. So now here's the thing. Here's another part. You don't necessarily have to do a dual subclass system, but there's alternatives to invocation systems that allows for directed modularity. Well, by that I mean, look at Hunter Ranger. That is a very modular class, but it's not, or subclass, but it's not a hodgepodge of things. You pick specific thematic choices from amongst similar thematic choices. There is mutual exclusivity in how Hunter Ranger is arranged that enables you to express different themes without a massive list, and while retaining individual potency and power for each of those choices.
Yeah, that's the one that lets you choose like 1 of 3 combat tactics at each level.
3 or 2, depending on the level, yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Or a Totem Barbarian, same sort of deal.
Yeah. Or is the Storm one is similar to that, isn't it?
It is, but also I hate Storm Herald. I love Storm Herald thematically. I hate Storm Herald mechanically. I think it feels very underwhelming.
Okay, yeah, that's fair to say.
Well, not even same thing with Kensei. Kensei I just hate.
Yeah, Kensei is the monk one that lets you use weapons, right?
Weapon Monk. My issue with it is that Monk as a chassis does not allow for weapon use in any real, consistent, effective way. Kensei spends more of its time punching than it does slicing. And I think that's a grave sin, and it was half the reason I rage made Disciple. I had the idea of it floating around in my head for a long time, and I just never did it. Then I read Kensei, and I was like, I'm so upset about this. And then time went on, and I read it again, and every time I read it, I got progressively a little more angry. And I'm like, you know what? I'm making my own Kensei with Blackjack. And now I'm not going to continue the quote.
But no, the Disciples' central theme feels very much like a kind of anime.
100%. When I go back to redo it, I'm probably going to add some less anime options, or at least rather some options that are distinctly less magical. Right now, a lot of Disciple is like explicitly like, fire and ice, and not ice, but like that kind of a thing. And I think I went overboard. The original Tome of Battle had a whole bunch of extraordinary martial abilities, but like, you weren't swelling to twice your size in the average Tome of Battle maneuver.
Yeah, I love the Tome of Battle back in 3.5.
No, I love it. Honestly, I think the biggest thing with Disciple for me was Disciple is where a lot of my design philosophies first formulated. As I was realizing the kind of things I like and the kind of things I don't in the class, and why the original version of Disciple felt so hollow to me when it was just a list of techniques. And that was because I was getting that this is kind of bland thing. When I realized that it was because there was no significance to the character to any of these techniques, that's when I realized a lot of my problems with Fighter, actually, but with that setup. So when I went to do Disciple V2, which is what we currently have, I decided that every single discipline needs to be an extant thing that affects the way the character thinks and feels. The philosophy the character holds needs to be important to the kind of abilities they will use, because that is probably the most anime thing of all.
Yeah, because like each discipline was supposed to be like philosophies, right?
In a sense, yes, but really they didn't push it as hard as I do.
No.
They had signature weapons and signature skills and things like that, and it was a lot more mechanical than story-based.
They felt like weapon-based martial arts.
Yeah. In a sense, yes. And I want to keep some of that. I want to... This is part of the problem, right? Weapon-specific martial arts always has a bit of an issue in 5th edition now. Because weapon specificity has sort of gotten a bit of a bad rap because it limits flavor a bit more than it helps it in a lot of situations. So I had a lot of people during Disciples development actually tell me, like, no, limit them to one discipline. This is too much. It's like several subclasses. And I'm like, nah, it's like several spells. I'll get to that.
Yeah, it felt more like schools of magic.
That's the idea. I wanted... The Disciple came into it, like one of the defining things, they need to be a master of multiple martial arts. That was definitely a definitive part of what they needed to be for the concept to work for me. because differentiating your martial influences, it's one of the most definitive martial things you can do. Like, the warriors had styles. They had practiced under specific arts and specific setups, and that isn't actually anywhere in 5th edition. If fighting styles emphasize something like that, something with distinct cultural background within a given setting, people would consider it a significantly less boring feature.
I think that's totally fair to say, yeah. Because it seems like such a mundane footnote.
It's supposed to... It has a distinct thematic purpose. Fighting style represents formal martial training.
Are you a master of long blades or short blades or the net and the spear and all this?
Yeah, but like that's the reason why fighter, paladin, and ranger get fighting styles, but rogues and barbarians don't. It's why Valor Bard gets it, and why Swords Bard... So it's why Valor Bard doesn't get it, and why Swords Bard does. It's about distinct formal martial training. So there is something there, but it's very diluted.
Yeah.
In the search for simplicity.
That's definitely fair to say, yeah.
One of the things that, back to optional complexity, I'm a massive fan of the you can get some Battle Master maneuvers fighting style. Absolutely massive fan of that thing. My ideal solution for fighter is this. Give it 2 fighting styles. One at level 1 and one at level 6. Allow them to take that fighting style twice if they want to. And then, as a sidebar of Battle Master, list distinct styles and the list of maneuvers that comprise them. That'd blow people away. That I'm sure of. Are you trained in Drow 2-weapon fighting? Sick, take these maneuvers. It gets your mind going, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I'm just thinking about it.
And that gets you pretty far.
Yeah, I mean, this reminds me of something else that I was talking about recently where we were basically saying, like, I think this was Angry again. Maybe it was Kaim. Those guys come up a lot in my mind recently. But we were talking about the idea that as you play D&D 5th edition, the game does not encourage your character to develop. You become who you are very early on. You gain like your bond, your flaw, your ideal. You take on your class, even your subclass, and then you are that for the rest of the game, like through levels 1, like essentially 3 to 20, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like in any other narrative-based game or game with narrative in it, the character is supposed to develop and change and grow. And 5th edition just doesn't do that. It's actively against it.
I will say there are exceptions to this. If you look at the monk class, its entire base class is centered specifically around progressing physically and then progressing spiritually. Tiers 1 and 2, monk is all about physical excellence to the point where it doesn't even get wisdom saving throw proficiency. And that is, I am convinced, explicitly because levels 1 through 10, or levels 1 through 9, levels 1 through 11, are meant to represent that physical growth. And then only after that point do you get things like, stillness of mind, or not stillness of mind, empty body, things like astral projection, things like not aging, that on that note.
Oh, okay, yeah. I hadn't actually thought of that.
However, in general, I agree with what you're putting out.
Because, yeah, I mean, you don't have, like, the prestige classes or anything like that anymore. Like...
And prestige classes definitely did encourage your character to grow somewhat. Assuming you actually played to the prestige class. Not everyone did.
Yeah, and I think largely by the end of 3.5, everyone just kind of figured out the most optimal builds, and then people just kind of played that with it all predefined for you.
Which is very lame.
Yeah.
Also, the downside of the prestige class system is definitely the fact that it made you take feats that were kind of boring in order to get there. I'm looking at you, Dodge. For those who don't know, Dodge, you would select an opponent as a free action on your turn, and you get +1 AC against them. Remember to do that every turn.
I actually quite like the idea of the monk being changed into the librarian.
The librarian?
It's basically what Matthew Mercer did with them.
The open.
Like,
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, like he made them expositors. But the idea is basically that they're Western monks instead of Eastern monks. So they're responsible for lore and information and copying books, and they're responsible for libraries and accumulating information, spy networks, that kind of thing.
Well, here's the thing, right? I don't think that's an issue with monk necessarily. I think that's an issue with people not being super creative with monk. I feel like a lot of the time you get into a campaign and there's a monastery, people are just like, let's put some pseudo-Buddhist stuff here. It's like, they did more than just that, you know? It was more to them than martial arts and Buddha.
True. But I think the way they're presented in D&D, I mean, all of the Orientalism is built in, right? I don't know how much you want to get into this conversation.
In a sense, you're not wrong. I definitely think the game could do it better. But also, hey, this is where some of that complexity thing can come in. You can choose the kind of monk you are in this little Pact Boon style feature at 3rd level. Boom! Or something like that. Actually, one of the ideas I had when variant class features came out is replacing the features the monk gets at level 2 with key with different features, and keeping that as a way to define different martial arts style. So right now there's the default monk, Flurry of Blows, Patient Defense, Step of the Wind. All right, that's not my monk. My monk follows the way of the... I'm trying to think. Oh, way of doesn't work. That's the subclasses. So we'll need to give a name to the default one. You know, let's do what about the animal styles? 5th edition doesn't have anything for the animal styles.
Oh, true.
So let's say this is the current monk we have is. I'm going to say something that sounds kind of appropriate.
The crane. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, my monk doesn't do that. My monk does bear. He does just like this one massive punch. And instead of dodging, he just takes it. And instead of running, instead of Step of the Wind, he just, I don't know, mauls people. This is all off the cuff.
Maybe he could do that thing where you can move very quickly, but only towards an enemy.
Aggressive, yeah, something like that. Once again, limited modularity that adds a lot of expression. That is my it's not my number one philosophy, but like that is, if you're gonna take away one thing about mechanical design from me, find those spots where you can limit the amount of mechanical complexity and maximize the amount of thematic impact. That's gonna make everything you do stand out.
Well, my nose is thoroughly blocked now, so I'm probably gonna have to go and take care of this.
All right.
But yeah, man, I really appreciate you coming back again, and I'm looking forward to speaking some more with you. Every time is a delight.
I appreciate it. Likewise, my friend.
That's good to hear, dude.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna leave you out. If there's anything else, feel free to ask, okay?
Oh, absolutely, man. Yeah, sorry, I'm still reeling from this.
Yeah, no issue, dude. I'll talk to you later.
No worries, man. Thank you again. Have a good night.
You too.
Thanks again to Izzy for joining us, and if you like the sound of his work and want to check it out, there's a link to his G Drive in the description you can use while he's building his new publishing label. In the meantime, he's happy for you to head over to the Discord of Many Things, and you can just ask for Izzy there. Join us next week when we'll be talking to the Sterling Vermin himself, Benjamin Huffman, the king of DM's Guild and author behind the Pugilist, Scholar and Magus classes, the complete Arcanist Handbook, and a multitude of adventures, monsters, races, and more. And of course, last but not least, thank you for making it to the end of the video. Until the next adventure, stay safe.